All right. So we have Kirt Graves, audio producer, narrator of 150 audiobooks, and co-host of both the Hoof and Fang podcast and Narrator Roundtable. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. And I think I need to update my bio because I think I've crossed 200 now.
Yeah, I thought you did, but I didn't want to
hmm
manually count them, so I was just
Yeah,
like,
no,
I'll
no,
just go with
yeah.
150. It's like there's a lot here,
I
but
mean, come on, don't you do
yeah.
any research for this thing?
Well, I don't know, maybe.
But yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. It's time to go
yeah.
in and find all my bios and update them.
Yeah. And I ended up in touch with you through email. A story that you don't technically know, but I found you through TikTok, emailed you, and I thought it would be a really good idea to have an audiobook narrator come on for the Dialogue Doctor podcast and kind of talk about the process of audiobook narration. So,
Yeah,
if you're ready, I've got a collection of questions for you.
I'm ready. Let's
Okay.
go.
So, first up, I saw in your bio that you said that you had 15 years as an award-winning speech and debate coach, and that's where you found your voice in narrating. And I'm
hmm
curious, how did you come across, or how did you come about um, with that sort of history and informing your narration style?
I mean, I was just a speech and debate kid in high school. And then when I came back to my hometown, my school was looking for a coach, and I was like, "Oh, I can do that for like a year. Like I
Yeah,
can fill in, you know."
yeah,
And then I did it for 15 years, and I worked with amazing kids, and had some kids go to nationals and end up in finals, and I got some state awards as a coach, and it was just like this really really great experience as as a coach of young people, but as somebody who was always interested in the craft of acting
hmm
and performance and writing and delivering remarks, emceeing, like all of those things are all present in the activities of speech and debate. And so I just got to stretch those muscles for like 15 years. And I know like the old adage is like, if you can't do, teach. But like,
hmm
honestly, one of the best ways to learn is to teach and to
yeah,
work with like hundreds of different types of personalities and learning styles over 15 years and figure out very quickly like how do you work with a person, what language do they need you to use so they understand you, very quickly assessing scripts because like kids will come to you with these 10-minute scripts with like 40 characters and like you have to help them bring it to life. And so sort of without knowing it, that whole time I was really training myself to look at scripts and create characters, which came in very handy when then I sort of fell into audiobook narration.
yeah,
I
yeah. I
really
can
think it's
definitely
like the
see that.
best training you can have for this
Yeah.
exact work. And I'm always surprised when I'm in rooms with narrators and there aren't like, it's not 90% kids who did speech and debate. I'm like, where are all my friends who did this?
Where are you? That's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, especially with coming into that how you basically do audiobook narration and the fact that you're sort of working with these people who are trying to train themselves and you are able to sort of pick apart and internalize that and sort of develop that internal existence. So I can
Yeah.
definitely see how
It,
that works
it,
out.
it gave me a lot of different pathways. And so
Yeah.
when it comes time to break down a script, do character assessments. Like there's just a lot of tools in that toolbox
hmm
that again I wasn't putting in there on purpose. It just was like this thing I was doing, and then it translated so well when I was like audiobook narration. I can do that.
Yeah. Speaking of that sort of tools in your toolbox or superpowers, you've mentioned before that having grown up queer in the Midwest, living with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and OCD, those have been sort of tools or superpowers in narration. How do those experiences enhance that ability to connect and embody those diverse characters in your work?
I mean, I think the biggest best superpower you can have as any kind of actor, but particularly as an audiobook narrator who has to play so many different types of people, is empathy.
hmm
And I think growing up, being gay, figuring out that that wasn't normal, that wasn't the norm, and like having to hide it, all of that taught me to just be extremely aware of what everybody in the room was thinking
Mm-hmm.
so that I could clock if they were thinking something about me I didn't want them to.
Yeah.
And so I think that built so much empathy in me. I then later worked in a mental health clinic that built empathy and a sense of humor. And so all of the things that I've discovered as an adult with diagnoses in mental health and neurodiversity, um, I look back on that time and I'm like, oh, that's why I was so obsessive about that, or that's why I was so sensitive about that. But in a lot of ways, as tough as some of those things were at some times, um, they also gave me like some superpowers to be able to navigate a world that was like, I mean, it was getting better even when I was a teenager, but like it wasn't friendly.
No,
You know,
yeah,
like I had
unfortunately.
fag scrawled on my locker sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they knew
Mm-hmm.
before I did,
Yeah.
you know, and then uh, so it's crazy to think how far we've come by even now. I mean, I was 15 then. I'm going to turn 40 this year. So much change has happened, but it's thinking back to that time. I was like, oh God, yeah, I spent a lot of time hiding and changing who I was to fit the situation I was in. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is what has guided me through a lot of my life, and especially in this work.
Yeah, definitely. I resonate with that so much because same thing. I grew up in a small town queer person, and like there were times where I had like we had a day of silence where people would wear red and they would be silent that day to
Mhm.
recognize all the times that other queer people had to be silent. But yet we had people in white shirts with Bible verses who shouted at us all day.
Mhm.
And so much of that of just like when is it safe to be or express who you want to be? And so you almost have to take on these characters just to fit in at certain times based off of pure safety.
Right.
And I think that that fits in with almost any kind of difference that people have.
For sure. And I mean, I talk to my friends of color and other neurodiverse narrators, women who are narrators, and like they all have very similar stories of like a lot
Yeah.
of how we learned how to act was just walking through the world trying not to be noticed.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Not to just switch gears entirely from that subject,
Okay.
but um I am curious though with how do you prepare yourself for these new audiobook projects? How do you like immerse yourself in that story? How do you form those connections with those characters before you begin recording?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the answer to this question has changed so much over the years. Because I used to have to spend a lot of time with the story. Even with
Hmm.
all that work in forensics and like quickly assessing a script and making character choices, like I would sit down and I would read the whole thing like I was consuming it as a person who bought the book, and I would
Hmm.
take copious notes and I would really like think about like how does this person going to sound different from this person, and like what is this person's arc, and like I did all of that work. The longer I've done it, the more I've done it, all of those muscle, like a lot of that is muscle memory now. The more books you do, the more you see how so many stories have similar beats. So you can just kind of start picking through a book and being like, great, okay, this beat, that beat, this beat. Uh, this character reminds me of this person I've done before. This person, this character reminds me of this person I've done before. Um, so, like, what audiobook preparation looks like for me now, as somebody who's been doing this for almost 8 years, is so different from when I was in year one. Because now I can prep a book fairly quickly, and I'm also much better at picking books that I'd be good for,
Mm,
which is something that comes with both experience but also clout. Like you almost have to have a certain number of books under your belt before you can feel comfortable saying, you know what, actually, this one's not for me. I
yeah,
don't think I'd be very
definitely.
good at this. This will be difficult for me to pull off. So find a narrator for whom it won't be. You know,
Yeah.
go elsewhere because I'm not the guy. And so that also makes the whole process easier when you just pick projects that you're attracted to and that you enjoy.
Yeah. How do you go about knowing when a project is not for you?
It's a gut feeling. You
Gotcha.
know, I mean, sometimes it's about what is on the page. There are
Mhm.
some, like, I've done like motorcycle club romances that are like
Mhm.
every macho stereotype. Everybody is like a hulking, gruff, deep voiced like person. And it's just like, that's not me. Like I
Mhm.
can do that for a few lines in a book, but I can't sustain a whole book
Yeah.
as that type of person. So when I see things that are like hyper masculine, often very violent, often not real great about women, like I've just learned those aren't for me. Like as a whole genre, as a whole category, I'm not good at that.
Yeah.
So
That
sometimes
makes
you can
sense.
just cut with a broad sword and be like, okay, nope, that whole thing is gone. Other times it's about the writing. Um, I mean, I work with a lot of indie authors, and very rarely, I'm lucky, very rarely I have had to say like, I'm sorry, this book isn't ready to be an audiobook.
Mhm.
Like, I would have to do too much work to make this make sense out loud.
Yeah.
Take
Okay.
another pass, you know?
Yeah.
So that's another, I mean, it's an easy no. It's a hard thing to say to somebody, but it's an easy like, oh, this is not ready for audio.
Mhm.
And then other times it's just like, do I like this story? Because
Yeah.
if I don't care for the person that I'm going to be spending that much time with, again, find somebody who does relate to that person, who does enjoy that type of story, or does share the sense of humor of the author. Um, but otherwise, I have a pretty wide variety of things that I do enjoy,
Mhm.
and it's pretty rare that somebody will even come to me with something that would be like so outside my skill set. I'd have to say no. Um,
Mhm.
like I very rarely get asked to do a book like, you know, like, could you do this whole thing in a Serbian accent? No. You know, like, but you know, so a lot of the times the work that people are approaching me with, it's they've already done the vetting, and I can just kind of
Yeah.
be like, yeah, I like this. This seems like fun.
Yeah.
This seems like it would be, this is something that I can spend. I mean, if it's going to be a 10-hour audiobook, this is something I can spend 60 hours working on. I can
Yeah.
live in this world
Yeah.
for a
I mean,
week and a half.
the I think one thing that writers should know if they don't is that when it becomes an audio project, it is a pure collaboration between the narrator and the writer in the sense of you are embodying the that essence. It is
Hmm.
becoming its own piece of media
Yeah.
that can closely reflect it. We can have narrators who might read word for word with little to no acting, but I know from your work you do something very different from that. You present something that offers itself as its own thing that is closely tied to the written work.
Yeah. I just want to push back on one thing because I think the
Yeah,
word
absolutely.
collaboration can be a misnomer. It is a collaboration in that, like, you've created work and now I'm going to take your work and make something with it.
Hmm.
Um, and of course there is time at the beginning of the process for the author to have input usually, and that's true whether it's indie or through a traditional publisher. There's usually time for authors to share important information with the narrator, but it really is a very isolated process. Like
Okay. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it it is not the type of thing where like, oh, I finished a chapter, here, take a listen, let me know if you have any notes. Like
Hmm.
once the narrator is has the baby, we take care of the baby and we put it out into the world.
Yeah.
It is, and I think that that can be hard for authors sometimes who haven't ever gone through the process, because it must be so nerve wracking to be like, well, here's my baby, but that's really what you have to do. You have to say, here's
Yep.
my baby, and I guess I'll see what you do with it on the back end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but if you hire a competent narrator and you're confident in the work that you have put into the book, it is shocking how many times that translates into like what the author hears in their head, how often that comes out the speakers on the other end,
Yeah.
because they put it on the page, and the narrator knows how to pick up what the author put down.
Yeah.
But yeah, that word collaboration can just be scary
Yep.
For most narrators, because most of us have had an experience where we let the author be too involved. It was like, ooh,
Yeah,
nope,
yeah.
can't do
Yeah,
that
that's a
again.
good call out for sure. And yeah, no, I definitely agree with you that the more authors know that it's kind of a hands-off process,
Mhm.
that you get it at the end and you can do your pickups, find out if there was anything, but um, even
And
then,
again, let
yeah,
us know as much as you can at the beginning. Like if it's
exactly.
important to you, tell us about it. You
Yeah.
know, if the whole time you were writing this book, you were picturing Matthew McConaughey, tell me that, because
Hmm.
that will help me when I'm creating the character. It may not be exactly the same, because I've had sometimes authors be like, "Oh, I imagined this actor," and I'm like, "No, you didn't write that person."
Mm.
Like, and it took a while for me to be like, "All right, thank you for that note. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to do what I see on the page." And then out the back end, the author's like, "Oh my God, it's exactly how I heard it in my head." And I'm like, "That's what I thought." Uh,
So with that then, what makes a good character note for you to know what the writer has in their head? Not necessarily what's on the page,
mm.
but like what would make a good note for you?
Well, first I will say, I love it when the author says, "It's all on the page."
Perfect.
I put it in the book. I described the people. That's everything that's important to me is already there.
Hmm.
I think that's great. Uh, Especially in contemporary romance. Sometimes all of that is not there, and I think that's on purpose, because I think part of the appeal of romance is you get to sort of like bring your own ideas to it as a reader.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
get to sort of like picture the romantic leads in your head the way you want to. So sometimes authors are purposefully vague, so that the reader can fill in the blanks. And those are the moments where, like, again, if it matters to you as the author, tell me I was picturing this person, or like
Hmm.
my uncle Jerry really influenced this character's voice, and he's like a cranky Jew from Brooklyn. Like, tell me these things up front. Um, and if there are any vocal qualities or accents, things that, again, most of the time they're on the page. But if for
Yeah.
some reason they're not, tell me, because there is a moment in the beginning of the process where you can give a little bit of feedback. But if we make it to the end of the project and you're like, "Oh no, that person was supposed to have a Jersey accent," and it didn't say anywhere in the book that there was a
Hmm.
Jersey accent,
Hmm.
uh, that is not the narrator's fault.
Yep.
And there's going to be some extra compensation for the time it takes to fix that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
but yeah, but mostly I would say just put it in the page. And most authors, I feel like they do that. They want
Hmm.
they want the reader to see what's going on in their head, and they put the most important traits forward for that to happen.
Yeah. That makes sense. And the way that I sort of see that is um for the writer to really say that their work speaks for itself, and to really like, if it doesn't and you're concerned and you need to present dossiers of your character and how they speak to it,
Hmm.
maybe look back at the work and make sure that it's reflecting that,
Right.
as sort of a note back to the writer.
Yeah.
um
And there are times, since you mentioned a dossier, I mean, there are times when you're hired for book one, and like that you and the author both know there's going to be 12 books.
hmm.
And
Hmm.
so if you have a world building document that gives the narrator more information than exists even in that first book, do it. Don't
Hmm.
hold back. Don't try to like preserve the suspense or like the mystery or the discovery for the narrator. We can't handle that shit. We need to know
Yep.
early on if the person who says two lines in book one becomes the main character in book five, and they
Hmm.
sound this very specific way, but we didn't know about it. It's like,
Yeah.
tell us early.
Yeah. Very similar to editing. You want your editor to sort of know those big setups to make sure that you're setting them up.
Yeah.
So that's a very similar note. That's a good
Yeah.
note too.
This is not a relationship in which you want to keep secrets for fun.
Right.
You
Right.
know? Like,
You're not the hungry reader. You're the
right, right,
narrator who
right.
needs to
I mean,
narrate.
I understand the impulse, but like
Yeah.
this is not that time. We
Yeah.
don't get to enjoy books like that when we are
Hmm.
recording them. we have to have everything spoiled for us. We have to know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Um, so we before we hit record, we were talking a little bit, and you had said that you've been in the booth since 7, which was a while ago. What does your
well,
typical day look like?
technically I said I hadn't been outside since
Oh,
7 in
fair,
the morning.
fair.
I haven't
I was
spent
like, what?
all I haven't spent all that time actually in the booth. I typically will spend about 4 to 6 hours in the booth a day. I just had a cold that took me out of the
Hmm.
booth for like a full week. So my days are a little longer right now by
Yeah,
necessity because I have some catching up to do. Uh so like today was a longer day. I think I started around 8:30 and I left the booth around 3:30. So,
gotcha. Yeah,
but there is a limit. You
yeah,
can't push yourself
no.
too hard. I have a friend who's dealing with this right now, um, with a major publisher
Hmm.
that their script came late, and the publisher's like, "Well, can you still get it done by the original deadline?" And it's like, "No. What do you think I'm doing over here?
Yeah,
Just like waiting for
yeah,
this project?" It's like, "No, I have
yep,
other things scheduled." Like,
yep,
and
yeah.
there's really no catching up once you fall behind,
Hmm.
because you just can't push your voice or your brain that
Yeah,
hard for too long.
yep,
So you can, maybe do extra 10, 20 minutes a day of finished audio until you're caught up, but it takes time.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm in
Are there
I'm in that
any,
world right now.
yeah, um, you'd mentioned a friend who is doing a traditionally published. What are some of those like big differences between working with traditionally published and independent? Just curious.
There's really three levels. Like there's independent, then there's like production houses, like places that
Hmm.
buy audio rights and then hire the narrators. And then
Hmm.
there's like the publishers who are working directly with the author and who hire the narrator and do it all. Um, so with indie authors, we are in charge of everything. So that's
Hmm.
when our audio producer hats go on.
Hmm.
We are the talent, but we are also the technician. We are the engineer. We are the director. We are the proofer, uh, or we are hiring those roles out. But we're in charge of all of it. We're in charge of making sure that gets done. And we are usually um, the sole contact with the author, speaking to them directly and billing them directly. Um, with a production house and with publishers, we only have to narrate
Hmm.
because they're doing all of that other stuff on their end.
Okay.
Now, now what's happened, especially since the pandemic, is that like home records have become common. It's the norm,
Hmm.
even for publishers now. Um, so like people like me who work in Green Bay, Wisconsin, in my little booth, like I can produce an audiobook for Penguin Random House over in the United Kingdom, for Harper in New York. Like I can produce for anybody. And they take my little raw audio and they make it sound pretty and they tell me what corrections need to be made. And they are in touch with the author to give me the information that's important. And I just get this little packet that says, like, here's everything you need to know and the book. And it's like,
Yeah.
great, thank you. this is this is great. So like
Yeah.
I'll just read the book now, I guess.
That's
So
nice. Yeah.
yeah. It's really just the difference between working by yourself or working with a team,
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. Um,
which I imagine
I'm
is very
curious.
similar for indie authors versus traditionally published authors.
Yeah, yeah, very, very much so. Lots of hats worn by the indie
Hmm.
authors.
Yeah.
Um, so you were pretty much one of the most prominent queer narrators, and I'm curious, how do you approach stories with those themes, and like what sort of nuances do you think are important within those stories, and why to you is queer representation in audiobook narration so important?
Oh, that was so many questions. Okay.
I know.
How do I approach narrating queer stories? Just with myself.
Hmm.
Um, because I have that experience. I know what it feels like. And so I can access that within me. I don't have to research
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Um, I did a panel at the American Library Association conference last year. And the first question that was asked is why is it important to have representation in audiobooks? And my answer was because what you want to hear in an audiobook is honesty.
Hmm.
Whether it is the most dry textbook or nonfiction memoir to crazy aliens having sex on faraway planets, like no matter the story you're telling, you want it to feel true.
Yeah.
And so when you are writing queer characters that live in the real world, the fastest point between A to and Z is to just hire somebody who already understands all of that.
Hmm.
And especially in audiobook production, we don't have a lot of time. We get the book in advance and we'll do a read, and like I said, my pre-reads now are much faster than they used to be. But we have 10-15 hours of content that we sit down and we do consecutively in really, I mean, we make mistakes and we fix them, but like it's one take, it's one shot. We don't go back and be like, oh, I'd really like to redo chapter 7 because I'm feeling different today. If we did that, we'd never get anything done. So we sit down, we do the whole book, and then we say goodbye to it. We
Hmm.
don't have like a month of rehearsal before we put it on stage. We don't get to rehearse every scene right before getting in front of the camera with our fellow actors. There's no collaborating with other people usually. So if you want your story to feel honest and true, hire somebody who looks, acts, and has the experience of the character that you are writing.
Yeah.
And experience is the important part.
Hmm.
Um, because it's not necessarily important that you hire someone who is gay if you wrote a gay character. What's important is that you hire somebody who's walked through the world as a gay person.
Yeah.
You know, not every queer person has the same experience. There are queer people who live their whole lives never coming out, passing, never have to face any sort of discrimination. If you're writing that book, I don't know how you find that narrator because they're not out. But usually, when we're talking about queer books, we're talking about characters that are out, that are moving through the world and facing some sort of obstacle or backlash.
Yeah.
I've lived that. I know that. My fellow queer narrators know that. We don't have to learn it. We
Hmm.
don't have to pretend.
Yeah.
Attraction is such a hard thing to fake. Um, and like, if you've lived your whole life never thinking about whether or not you would be attracted to the same sex, you're probably not going to fake it very well. So, and at the end of the day, part of it is optics and representation mattering to people who can see themselves in the stories that are being told.
Yeah.
We don't need an entire industry that is doing like the Will and Grace of audiobooks, where like it's great that you're telling queer stories, but does the actor have to be gay? It's like, well, no, not necessarily, but like think about it from the perspective of the queer person who's consuming that content. And they're
Hmm.
seeing somebody being like, well, it's okay to tell a queer story, but we'd all really feel more comfortable if it was a straight person actually doing the talking,
Yeah.
you know? That, as much as it like felt progressive back when that show came out, I hope we can all agree now, looking back on it, that it's like, well, it would have been really lovely for all the gay people in that show, the most popular show featuring gay people ever,
Hmm.
to have all been actually queer. That like queer
Yeah.
people could have looked at that and been like, not only does the character represent me, but so does the person who's playing the part, and
Yeah.
that we're all comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So there is just the side of it that's like the optics and the representation. I mean, I would like to think the performance will be better, the quality of the final product will be better, but regardless of that, like what sort of message does it send if we're like, yes, we want to tell queer stories, but not with queer actors?
Yeah. I fully agree. And there's definitely something to it. Like when I see, listen, or read queer stories and I find out and it is about explicitly about a character's queerness, regardless of if that's a struggle of them coming out or just living their life in that
Hmm.
sense. But it is one of those forefront things and it's one of the main characters. I'm putting all these caveats on there because I do want people to write queer characters,
Hmm.
but there are caveats to that. When I have something that is of that tier and I discover that that they're not using queer actors to portray them, they're not, reaching out to the queer community to garner information and add that into the book, then I feel a little dismayed as a queer person. I'm just like, why? Why did you do
Right.
that? Like, why didn't you include us in this conversation if you're going to represent us?
And it is a conversation that is so centered on the queer experience too, because we do have that happening, where we
Hmm.
both welcome and encourage people who don't identify as queer in any way to like help us tell our stories, be an ally,
Yeah. Yeah.
help move our stories forward. And especially in the romance genre, like most of the people consuming romance are middle-aged white women, and that
Hmm.
doesn't matter what kind of romance you're talking about.
Hmm.
Most of the people writing romance are women. Doesn't
Hmm.
matter what kind of romance you're talking about.
Hmm.
So most gay romance authors are women, and
Yep.
they are our allies, and they are telling our stories. Sometimes in ways that, like, okay, well, that doesn't resemble real life at all in any way, shape, or
No.
form. Like,
Right.
but often in contemporary settings, in ways that, like, yeah, a queer narrator will make this better.
Hmm.
Just because the author isn't that doesn't mean we wouldn't want to bring in somebody who can then reflect that experience a little more. And the
Exactly.
reason why I say it's such a unique queer experience, because it's like, can you imagine if like black romance was written by mostly white authors,
Hmm.
and the feeling was like, well, I mean, we're writing this to be allies and to like put forward their stories, but then also let's hire white narrators for it.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Like you put it in a different context, and it's like our brain short circuits. It's like, well, no, we would never. No, we wouldn't do that. Like that would
Yeah.
be bad.
Yeah.
Um, but when it comes to gender and sexuality, we just have this flexible boundary that exists. I can't say whether that's good or bad, but it is the way it is.
Right.
But I just think like if you can welcome a queer person into the process, please do so.
Yeah. Exactly. This was actually this question kind of spawned off of a topic you had on the Narrators Roundtable podcast that I really enjoyed, and I highly recommend people check it out because you guys delve into really rough and tough topics sometimes.
Mm.
And there are, I want to say, like upwards of 6 or 7 episodes out already, and I'm just
Our
like,
our sixth one just came out this week. Yeah.
yeah, I'm just like, okay, we're diving right in, and I'm loving
Hmm.
every minute of it. Um, I would like to know like a little bit more, like how did this form? Why did this podcast form, and what do you aim to achieve with these sorts of discussions?
Sure. It started actually in one of the associations that narrators can join is called the Professional Audiobook Narrators Association. It's a new trade association that formed 3 years ago.
Hmm.
And three of the people who work on the podcast with me, including myself, so me, Gail Shallon, and Andre Santana, we were all on the DEI committee together for PANA. And originally, we were going to do a podcast for PANA. We even did like a pilot, like we really were committed to this. What became clear through that pilot is that if you're doing something for an organization, if you are representing other people, uh, formally or just in a de facto manner, conversations stay very polite. And so in that pilot, we didn't really get to the nitty gritty.
Hmm.
We didn't really say the things that needed to be said. And as we kept trying to develop it within that organization, it just became more and more clear that, like, if we're going to respect the other people who are a part of this organization, um, and if we want to be able to say these things without needing to be co-signed by 12 people on a board of directors, we just have to take it out of
Yeah.
that organization. So that's ultimately what we did. We said we can't do this here. Um, Not that PANA couldn't produce an excellent podcast, but it would have to be polite and professional in a
Mm.
way that like
Hmm.
doesn't get to the heart of those topics. So we said we'll just do it on our own. We invited two other narrators, Lindsay Dorcas and Deanna Anthony, to join us, so that we could have this rotating group of people who are uh, present most of the time, but you are still getting different perspectives. We call ourselves like the View of narrator podcasts because
Love it.
like we've gathered a diverse group of narrators from all over the country with different experiences and so we're there to share our perspectives, and then we bring in a guest, usually for each episode. Um, and it is based on topics, not interviewing people, not
Hmm.
talking about the craft. There are lots of wonderful podcasts out there for people who are interested in becoming narrators, who want to find out
Hmm.
like what narrators' journeys have been and like how they approach things. This was not that. We're going to talk about shit like DEI, about
Hmm.
identities and casting, about working with a co-narrator who's not pulling their weight. You
Hmm.
know, the things that actually affect us on a day-to-day basis, and things that we think could be fixed if we just talked about them.
Right.
These are the topics that are being talked about quietly at like industry events, or like we're sending each other instant messages in small groups, like, but if we're not talking about them as a whole industry, nothing's ever going to change. And so
Yeah.
that was the impetus for us to be like, okay, are we going to do this? Like, are we really going, if we're going to talk about it, are we really going to talk about it? And we did, and we put the
Hmm.
episodes out there, and
Hmm.
I'm very proud of the response we've gotten, and things like people are already talking about like putting policies in place that change things. We're hearing
Oh,
from
good.
producers who are telling us it's making them think differently about the process. Um, and it's just because we're finally taking groups of people who have been complaining about things quietly
Hmm.
and saying, let's examine it in the light.
Yeah.
And so that was our goal. It is what we continue to try to do, and we will see how it goes. Like, we know for sure
Yeah.
we're going to have a first run of 10 episodes and then come back in the fall with 10 more. And if it's still going strong, we'll continue. But I would say we've achieved our goal already, just in getting people to talk about things that we weren't talking about openly.
Yeah. I even think as a self-published author, not involved at all with the traditional process, these conversations were still really useful for me to listen to, just to know what's happening on your side and to be cognizant of what I could potentially do, or just just to be cognizant so that I can talk about it to anyone else if they, if I hear it. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate it. I think that it's a good shines a good light in, or I guess a bright light in a certain area about
Hmm.
things.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Thanks.
Yeah. And you have another podcast, which I
Hmm.
adore. Maybe too much, but Hoof and Fang podcast. Um, and this really it lifts voices for queer fiction. I would love to know what motivated you to start this podcast, and I will save my next question
Sure.
afterwards.
Sure. Uh, this is going to sound so terrible. What motivated us was money.
Yeah.
Um, from my perspective, I am looking at a world where like AI is a thing, and like
Mm-hmm.
all the companies that said they weren't going to use AI to narrate books are all doing it now,
Yep.
including
Yep.
Audible. Uh, and so the writing was on the wall really when Spotify bought one of the largest distribution platforms, Findaway Voices.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked at like as an industry, again, these are the quiet conversations that were happening. We're like, okay, Spotify just bought a huge chunk of audiobooks, and
Mm-hmm.
Spotify's model is to let people stream things for a small fee and then give pittance to the people on the back end who created that thing. We might have to start looking at different types of income if we want to continue to be freelance artists.
Mm-hmm.
Authors are going through exactly that same process. So I share an office with the author Maz Maddox, who is
Mm-hmm.
an indie author who I've narrated for, and in a wild turn of chance ended up moving to the same city that I live in, like
Hmm.
crazy. So like she comes here, she works remote for her day job, and then we chat, and it was just like neither one of us was egotistical enough. And I'm sorry to frame it like this because so many people are just so much better at this than I am. Neither one of us has the personality, I'll say it that way, um, to be like, I'm creating a Patreon. Come give
Hmm.
me money for being me. It's like some people are very good at that, and they like create
Yeah.
a lot of value in access just to them, and people eat it up.
Hmm.
Um, we're not those people, but we were like,
Hmm.
what could we create together where we could then say, and if you like this, please give us some money. So
Hmm.
we were both comfortable saying, let's create a podcast. Let's talk about all the same shit we're talking about here in our office, and like put it out there and talk to people who are doing the same things we're doing. Um, and then like part of it is public facing and is out there, and other parts of it are behind a paywall. But we are creating things for people to purchase,
Yeah.
which is something as we're both content creators that felt organic and natural and justified in a way that like just more access to me was never going to work in my brain. I'm just
Yeah.
not I'm too Midwestern.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't do it. So, and also we are seeing how problematic access to me can sometimes be. Uh, oh,
Why is that?
there's a whole controversy going on with a narrator who's had too
Oh,
much
yes.
access.
Yes.
People,
Yeah.
so like, and like that narrator is somebody who was like one of the first people to do a Patreon and was like,
Hmm.
come give me money just to have more access to me.
Yeah. And
Like,
that is and I'm recently aware of that, and that is absolutely horrendous what happened there. But I think that what you do over at Hoof and Fang podcast, you have these two tiers. One where you guys are breaking down the Animorphs, and I cannot stop listening to this. I binged them. I listened to the Hork-Bajir one yesterday. Um, or no, when it came out. But anyways, you have that one, and then you also have this other platform. And this is where I think that like you did the right thing when it comes to Patreon. And the top tier one, every month you're producing a piece of audiobook or an
mhm,
audiobook, um, that you are bringing in authors, you're creating a sort of a deal with them, um, and you are selling it for hoof and fang for about a year, and then it returns back to the author.
yeah,
And they don't pay up front. They actually don't pay at all, I don't think.
nope.
Um, how did that idea come into play, and how is that going?
Again, it's about like, how do we create other revenue streams?
Hmm.
Um, one way that narrators and authors can partner together that's been around for a while is you can do like a royalty share agreement,
Hmm.
and you can have uh, the narrator produces everything for little or no upfront cost, and then you just share the profits on the back end.
Hmm.
It's a slow way to make your money back if you're a narrator. If you hit the jackpot, as I did when I produced a TJ Klune book,
Hmm.
it can be awesome. Some other people I know have been like excellent at picking royalty share projects and have like they could sit back and like they could be sipping cocktails at the pool all month and still drag in six figures. Like
Hmm.
some people are so smart at that. So that's one way to do it. That has, as audiobooks became more and more popular, that became a thing of the past. Because if your book was making enough money to make producing an audiobook worth it, it is to your benefit, author, to just pay
Hmm.
us off.
Yeah.
Just pay our fee, take the book, put it on the market, collect all the sales for the rest of the life of that book. Don't share it with us for 7 years if you think it's going to be successful.
Hmm.
If you don't think it's going to be successful, you're not really going to be able to talk a narrator into partnering with you for it. So there are all these titles that are sitting out there, uh, especially in the world of romance and speculative fiction, which is what we love, that like they didn't make that initial splash to be able to
Yeah.
afford to do the audiobook.
Hmm.
But they are authors who have become popular writing other series. There are up and comers who just haven't had the chance to have that kind of exposure. And so what we wanted to do was just offer another option that was no cost, uh, but that we would be the sole beneficiaries for 1 year. So it's another
Hmm.
kind of royalty share, but we get to try to sell to our people, both through the Patreon and through our online store, and we get everything. We get 100% of sales. We do not distribute through Amazon or LibreOfn, or like nothing like that. We don't
Yep.
go to market. We only sell directly from us. We get that for 1 year, and then we give you the audiobook, and
Yeah.
you can take it to market, and
Yeah.
you can put it on Audible and LibreOfm and all the places, and you collect royalties from there on out.
Yeah.
But we get that initial splash. And our hope is that as we continue to build an audience for the podcast, we are creating a market for the authors who may not have ever reached those readers.
Yep.
And so it can be a symbiotic relationship of like, listeners come to us because you know and trust us. Meet this author.
Yep.
Or here's an author who had like this series is popular now, but like it wasn't popular enough when it first came out. So like let's do it now in audio. So yeah, it's definitely an experiment. We are looking at maybe changing the model a little bit, now that we've had 7 months of experience under our belt to see
Hmm.
the ways it's working and the way it's not working. Um, but we are going to continue with it, because I believe so strongly in giving independent authors an avenue to have an audiobook made,
Yeah.
um, especially if they've never had that experience, to be able to go through the experience of having an audiobook made, and then hopefully, having them succeed to the point where it was like worth our time to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from exactly what you're saying though, like you are basically giving the person access to your audience, hopefully finding new fans who, when the book reverts back to them and they can publish it, we'll leave reviews. We'll,
Hmm.
tell friends to get it. We'll do this and that. So I think it is a wonderful thing. It is a great way to lift voices that otherwise we may not be able to hear in audio format. So like when I heard you guys were doing that, I was like, wow, that's awesome. So yeah, I just really wanted to kind of hit on that note.
Thank you.
And also the Animorphs that I am addicted to.
Same. I'm
Yeah,
like, I'm
uh,
loving going through the world again.
yeah,
Even when I hate it, I'm loving it.
yeah. Yeah, there are some. I've forgotten how rough some of those books are, and then you
Right?
guys talk about them, I'm like,
How was I not traumatized as a child reading these?
I don't know. How
As an
did?
adult, I'm traumatized.
Yeah, it's really
Do you
good
know,
anti-war
I
propaganda.
forgot to bring this up in our podcast, so I'll bring it up here. Do you know the uh I guess fan fiction that's been going around, Manacled?
I do not, but
Okay.
go on.
It's Harry Potter fan fiction.
Mm,
But it's like, what if Harry Potter lost, Voldemort won, and then they created a breeding program just like in The Handmaid's Tale. It is
okay.
following Hermione as she basically becomes one of those girls. It is
Yeah,
dark as fuck. Can I say fuck? I just did.
you
Um,
did twice now, so
it is so dark and sad. And there was a day last week when I was like, well, I got to read my Animorphs, so I'm ready to talk about it. That I was like, "Oh, I'm just not in the mood for this sad story. I'll go read Manacled
oh
instead."
well, you made a
And
mistake.
I was like, well, how dark does a story, a
Oh yeah,
middle
yeah.
grade fantasy story, have to be where I'm like, I'd rather read that Handsmaid retelling of Harry Potter.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but at the same time, it's such a good series. It's
It is.
wild.
And
Yeah.
I think we're getting to the point where like I dropped off as a kid
Yeah.
because like we're getting
Yeah,
to
you guys
plots that I'm
definitely did
like,
for me.
I don't remember any of this anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to really now start like just reading as a fan again.
Hmm. and have a watch party of the shows that were on Nickelodeon. But that's another
Hey,
story.
if we can find them, that's the tough part. We've been
I
looking.
will find them for you.
Okay, great.
I think I still have the VHSs.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
yeah, fancy. Okay, sorry. Totally diverted, but uh, I know we talked a little bit about AI, but I'm curious, how do you see the field of audiobook narration evolving? Do you see these sort of like hubs of Patreon sort of things, or what do you see for the future of audiobooks?
Hmm. I There is so much that is up in the air right now. I would like to believe that the consumers will very quickly identify the ways in which a human narrator is superior to any other version of narration that they can get. And we've talked about this on our podcast. So if you want to hear my full rant about AI, find Hoof and Fang and find that episode. But I want to believe consumers will value human voices and human storytellers above what a computer can do. And we will find our way basically back to the norm.
Hmm.
Because I have yet to talk to somebody who's like, even if they're willing to accept what AI can do, they're not saying, "Oh yeah, it's just as good as a narrator." It's like
Yeah,
it's a huge improvement on like uh text to speech readers that
yeah,
previously existed. And it's like, sure, absolutely, that is what it is. If this were an accessibility tool, I would be totally 100% behind it. But that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell this service as though it is like a computer narrator and replace us. So, no, thank you. So I would love it if like we just got back to the point where like narrators could just feel secure in their jobs again, because like we're the ones doing it and people still love audio. And I think it's one
hmm
of those forms that like it probably won't go away, because there's always times when we can't be reading a book, you know,
yeah,
unless self-driving cars become a thing ASAP.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
there are times when you're doing other shit when you could be listening to the radio or music or an audiobook. And I think that is a universal experience that will last forever. And as audiobooks become more and more popular, I hope that like the cry for actual human narrators will make it so that we continue to be valuable enough to be able to do this as a job.
yeah.
Because I don't know that there is another model where we like I'm trying to supplement my income with this other thing. Um,
Hmm.
but there's also a component of that that is like I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of income because I
Yeah,
believe in a project. So I don't know that like there are other models that
yeah,
work if you want to do this work full time.
yeah,
So that it's just something to keep in mind too. Like if you're imagining a world where AI will take over some of the narration, but like some narrators will still be able to make it work, or like narrators can do it part-time and then like have a part-time job. It's like, girl, that's not how this works. Like
I
you
mean,
either
it's the
have the
same
time
for
to,
writers too, right?
right? Like you either have the time to devote to the thing or you
Hmm.
don't.
Hmm.
Like that transition from like narrating as a side gig to like your full-time job, like that is
Yeah,
purely a leap of faith, and
yeah,
it doesn't work out for everybody.
yeah,
And if you start taking away pieces of the pie, ooh,
yeah,
it just won't work.
yeah,
Like narrators will go away and all you'll be left with are text to speech, fancy
yeah,
text to speech readers.
yeah. Whenever if I have a book that has no audiobook, I do text to speech at like 2x speed and I'm
Hmm.
racing through that book because I have to hear it in order to
Hmm.
like I do a like I hear and I read. That's kind of how I'm like the best at reading. Um, but there is a quality to acted narration that I just cannot like I don't know if I've heard like, TikTok videos like AI and
Hmm.
all those things. And you can tell there's something there that's
Right.
just I don't know if I want to listen to this for 8 hours.
Well, and it's if it's successful in taking over a chunk of the market, it will still require so many human beings to keep it operating
Hmm.
that what's the point? Like if we're just
Mm-hmm.
replacing human artists with human technicians or human customer service agents or like human people who have to listen. Like today, I read a scene, two different chapters in the book I was reading today. One, it was like the way the character said the line, it was so obvious that it was meant to be sarcastic and it was meant to
Mm-hmm.
mean the opposite of what the character was saying.
Mm-hmm.
I, as a
Mm-hmm.
human narrator, know to do that. A
Yeah.
computer would trip up on that. And
Yep.
if it were to be corrected, that means a human still has to go in and like listen to it and then like reprogram that sentence so that it makes sense. I
Yeah.
also today in the book had somebody say, tomato, tomato.
Yeah.
That is, those two things are spelled the same. So like a
Yep.
computer would just be
Exactly.
like tomato, tomato. And it's like, that wouldn't make any fucking sense. And so like I had
No.
two instances today where I was reading through that I was like, a computer wouldn't catch this. You would
Yeah.
still need a human to make this work.
Yeah.
So why not just
And
continue to hire the humans that are doing the reading?
yeah, yeah. And like the person listening through it for pickups and yeah, that just a lot.
Yeah. The whole model is that like it'll be cheaper and easier and faster. And it's like, but
Yeah.
none of those things are better.
Yeah.
Nobody's claiming it's going to be better. It's just like, do you
No.
want to do, and like, in what other area of your life do you want something to just be cheap, easy, and fast?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want my home builder to just be cheap, easy, and fast. I don't want the person working on my car to just be cheap, easy, and fast. I also want them to be good. It's wonderful if they
Yeah.
can be cheap, easy, fast, and good. But how many times in life do we get that?
Yeah. And there is like a a story that comes with having human people tied to your work as a writer. So like I explicitly hired an illustrator that's a local queer artist for my cover because for me it was important to keep that story going with this is a queer story for queer artists and all of the pieces are intended to be a story that I can say that this person came in because of this reason and all of that. So there's something that comes with using or highlighting other people's artistry when you bring them into your own work.
Hmm. There's an energy there that happens when you
Yeah.
get to work with other people, for
Yeah.
sure.
Um, what advice would you have to offer writers looking to get their books in front of narrators? Are there any like specific elements that writers should consider when writing or editing that will make it well suited for narration?
To get in front of a narrator, if there's somebody you like and you want to have them narrate your book, look up their website and either fill out their form or send them an email. Don't go through ACX or like through like,
Hmm.
you can also like often send them like a DM on Twitter or X, or Instagram, whatever it is. Like, but just get in touch with them directly. Like, we are not unapproachable. We are so accessible. Just send us a message. We're happy that people try to offer us work. Every time we're happy, even if it doesn't work out, we're still happy somebody tried to offer us work. So
Yeah.
we'll never be like, ugh, why is this person reaching out to us? Don't they know who I am? Like I worry that sometimes people think that's how we are. That is not how we are. You want to
Hmm.
give us a job? We're listening.
Yeah.
We're paying
Yeah.
attention. Um, then rather than even giving advice, I'm going to tell authors, if you want some really great advice on how to write to narration, look up Joel Leslie Frumkin on TikTok,
Okay.
because he has a whole series that's just like, hey authors, here's something to think about as you're writing. Consider
Yeah.
this when about voice, consider this about tense, consider this about descriptions. Like,
Yeah.
he has it said so well and so succinctly. He knows what he's talking about. Go listen to him
Yeah.
rather than me saying, because like, of course there are things that like, uh I'll say this one thing because I think this is the most important thing: read your work out loud.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I cannot tell you how many things narrators catch, even in big five publisher books where like 1,800 people have read the book by the time it gets to the narrator. It has gone through so many passes and edits and changes. And we'll be reading it out loud and we're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. That's not the word they meant. Like,
Hmm.
read your work out loud, and it will make you a better writer, and certainly a better writer for bringing your book to
Yeah.
audio.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me.
You're
I'm
welcome. Thank you
gonna,
for having me.
yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording and we'll
Okay.
chat for a second.